A single dad who raised a kind-hearted daughter. A little girl who shared her lunch with a quiet boy sitting all alone. And the day his mother arrived, everything changed. This is not just a story about friendship. It's about how one small act of kindness can open the door to healing, connection, and even love. Before we begin, let me ask you this. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Have you ever wondered how much power a single act of kindness can hold? Not the big, dramatic moments that make headlines, but the quiet choices we make when no one else is paying attention. The ones that seem small, almost insignificant, yet end up shaping lives in ways no one could predict it. Sometimes it's just a smile to a stranger. Sometimes it's reaching out a hand when someone is about to fall. And sometimes it's as simple as a little girl sharing her lunch with someone who always sat alone. That's where this story begins. With a young father who had every reason to be hardened by life. His name was Chiron Varick, though most called him Cardo. He was 29, with steel gray eyes and a frame shaped not just by hours in the gym, but by years of sacrifice. He had carried responsibility on his shoulders since he was barely out of his teens. And through all of it, he had lived by a single principle, one he passed on to his daughter. Kindness is strength. His daughter, Lyriel, was 9 years old, and everything about her seemed touched with light. Golden hair that caught the sun, blue eyes that sparkled with laughter, a gentleness that made her stand out in a world that often rushed past. She had grown up hearing her father's words, and she carried them everywhere she went. It was Lyriel who noticed him, a boy with tousled chestnut hair and unusual hazel green eyes that never seemed to meet anyone else's. His name was Orion Calef. He sat alone at school, day after day, silent, withdrawn, as though he built a wall no one dared to climb. Most children ignored him. Some whispered about him. But Lyriel didn't turn away. She chose to sit beside him, to open her lunchbox and share what was hers, to offer not just food, but friendship. It seemed like nothing more than a child's small act of kindness. But that moment, the simple decision to see someone who felt invisible, would set in motion something far greater. It would draw Orion out of silence. It would bring his mother, Selvara, face to face with a father who had raised Lyriel alone. And slowly, it would weave together two lives marked by struggle, sacrifice, and quiet endurance. What began with a girl's compassion would grow into something neither family could have expected. A bond strong enough to heal heartbreak, to create hope, and to form the beginning of a love story. Because sometimes families are not born. Sometimes they are built. And sometimes all it takes is one simple act of kindness to change everything. Chiron Varick was not supposed to become a father at 19. At that age, most young men are still figuring out who they want to be. They're chasing dreams, chasing nights that blur into dawn, chasing futures that seem far away. But for Chiron, all of that ended the moment he held his newborn daughter in his arms. The world told him he was too young, too unprepared. Some whispered that he would fail. Yet in that fragile moment, staring into the tiny face of his daughter, he made a silent promise. He would not run. He would not falter. He would build a life around her, even if it meant sacrificing every dream he once had. Nearly a decade had passed since then, and in those 10 years, Chiron had been many things. A provider, a protector, a teacher, and sometimes simply a tired man pushing through one more sleepless night. He had missed out on parties, friendships, even relationships that couldn't survive the weight of responsibility. But asked him if he regretted it, and his answer would always be the same. Never, because all of it had been worth it. For her, life as a single father was never easy. Mornings began before dawn. He would lace up his shoes, run through his routine at the gym, then return home to prepare breakfast before waking Lyriel with a gentle knock on her bedroom door. He had learned to braid her hair, to sew the buttons back on her school uniform, to pack lunches with care. These were things he had never imagined himself doing, yet now they felt like second nature. Evenings were no less demanding. After long hours of work, he would come home exhausted, but still sit down with his daughter to help her with homework or listen to her excitedly recount her day at school. On weekends, he would take her to the park, where she would run barefoot in the grass, her laughter rising into the air like music. And in those moments, Chiron would watch her, his chest swelling with quiet pride, knowing that every sacrifice, every hardship had led to this, the gift of raising a child who was growing into someone kind, gentle, and strong. There were nights, of course, when the weight of it all pressed heavily on him. When the house was silent, when bills piled up on the table, when doubts crept in, whispering whether he was enough as a provider, enough as a father. But in those moments, he would think of the little girl sleeping soundly in the next room. He would remember the way her small hand fit perfectly into his, the way she looked at him as though he were her entire world. And the doubts would fade, replaced by determination. Through everything, Chiron held fast to one guiding principle, one he repeated to Liriel so often that it became a part of her. Kindness is strength. To him, kindness was not weakness. It was not naivety. It was courage. The courage to be gentle in a world that could be harsh. The strength to offer compassion when life gave you every reason to be bitter. He wanted his daughter to carry that truth in her heart, to live by it, to become someone whose light could never be dimmed. And so, Liriel grew up watching her father live by that very principle. She saw it when he treated strangers with respect, when he forgave those who wronged him, when he gave what little he had to help others. She absorbed it in the quiet moments, when he would kneel down to tie her shoes or kiss the top of her head after a long day. It wasn't the words alone that shaped her. It was the example he set every single day. To the outside world, Chiron was just a young man with a child he had been forced to raise too soon. But to Liriel, he was a hero, the man who never left, the man who chose her again and again, no matter how difficult the road became. And that devotion, that unwavering love, was about to ripple outward, because the kindness Chiron instilled in his daughter would not remain within their small home. It would soon reach the life of another child, a quiet boy who desperately needed someone to see him. And through that boy, it would lead Chiron towards something he never expected, a chance at love and the possibility of a family even greater than the one he had built alone. Liriel Varick was 9 years old, but there was something about her presence that seemed older, wiser, as if she carried a kind of light that didn't belong to her age. She was the kind of child people noticed without quite knowing why. Perhaps it was her golden blonde hair, tumbling freely over her shoulders, or her bright blue eyes that always seemed to shine with curiosity. But more than that, it was the way she moved the world, with gentleness, with kindness, with an instinct to see what others ignored. At school, where laughter often came with teasing, where children sometimes formed circles that left others outside, Liriel was different. She never liked watching someone sit alone. She never liked seeing sadness hidden behind lowered eyes. And it was during one of those ordinary school days, when the cafeteria buzzed with chatter and clatter, that she noticed him. Orion Kaelf. He sat at the far end of the table, a lunch tray in front of him, untouched. His chestnut hair fell messily across his forehead, shadowing eyes that were unusual, hazel mixed with green, like storm-touched glass. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched, as if making himself smaller would shield him from notice. And in a way, it worked. Other children rushed past, filling the seats with friends, voices rising with laughter, never pausing to glance his way. But Liriel noticed. Day after day, she saw him there, always alone, always silent. She wondered if anyone had ever asked him to join their table. She wondered if anyone had ever asked how he was doing. And one day, instead of wondering, she decided to act. She carried her lunch tray across the room, sat down gently across from him, and smiled. To her, it was simple. To him, it was startling. He glanced up, eyes wide with surprise, as though unsure whether she had made a mistake. Without hesitation, Liriel slid half of her sandwich toward him. "You can have this," she said softly. At first, he didn't move. His hand stayed in his lap, his eyes flicking from the sandwich to her face, almost in disbelief. And then, slowly, he reached out. He took it, not just the food, but the unspoken message that came with it. You don't have to be alone anymore. That was how it began. A simple lunch, shared across the table. A few words exchanged. Small smiles growing where there had been silence. And little by little, The walls Orion had built around himself began to soften. Lirio didn't stop with that first day. Every afternoon, she sought him out. Sometimes she would tell him stories about her father, about their little adventures, about the silly things she noticed on the way to school. Sometimes she would just sit quietly, letting him know she was there, even if he didn't feel like talking. It wasn't about forcing friendship. It was about offering it freely, without condition. Her classmates noticed, of course. Some teased her for sitting with the quiet boy. Others didn't understand why she bothered. But Lirio didn't care. Her father had taught her that kindness was strength, and she believed it with all her heart. If reaching out to Orion made her strange, then she would gladly be strange. And Orion, slowly, he began to change. His eyes met hers more often. His words, once hesitant and few, grew steadier, more confident. He laughed sometimes, softly at first, then with a brightness that revealed the boy he had been hiding. It was as though her light had found its way into the shadows he carried. For Lirio, it was natural. For Orion, it was life-changing. Because for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. What neither of them knew, sitting together at that cafeteria table, was how much that simple act would ripple outward, how it would reach beyond them, drawing their parents into each other's lives, how it would plant the first seeds of a bond that would transform not just two children, but two families. But for now, it was just a girl with a gentle heart and a boy who had been waiting, whether he knew it or not, for someone exactly like her. Orion Kaelf was a kind of child who blended into the background. He wasn't disruptive. He wasn't loud. He was quiet in a way that made people overlook him, as though he was just another shadow in a room filled with brighter lights. But silence doesn't always mean peace. For Orion, it was a shield. Life had not been easy for him. His parents' divorce had left scars no one could see, but he carried them every day. He lived with his mother, Selvara, a woman doing her best to hold everything together, while the pieces of her own heart still felt broken. He knew she worked late. He knew she worried. And though she never said it out loud, Orion could feel the weight she carried. Children often notice more than adults think they do. At school, he withdrew. It was safer that way. If he stayed quiet, no one could laugh at him. If he kept to himself, no one could remind him of everything he had lost. His unusual hazel green eyes rarely lifted from the floor. He sat apart at lunch, on the edges of the playground, as if the world had already told him there was no place for him in its center. Loneliness became a routine. The silence became familiar. And slowly, he started to believe it was better that way. Until Lirio appeared. At first, he didn't understand her. Why would someone like her, a girl so full of warmth, so unafraid to smile, choose to sit with him? Why would she notice him at all? When she slid half her sandwich across the table that first day, he hesitated. Not because he didn't want it, but because he couldn't believe it was real. But it was real, and she kept coming back. Each day, she showed him something different. That kindness wasn't a trick. That friendship didn't have to be earned by being louder, funnier, or braver than he felt he could be. With her, he didn't have to pretend. He could simply be. For Orion, it was like a door cracking open after years of being locked inside. The silence he had clung to began to loosen its hold. He found himself listening, then answering. He found himself laughing, not because he forced it, but because Lirio made it safe to. She had become a light in the shadowed corners of his world. Yet even as their friendship grew, part of him held back, because behind his quiet eyes was a fear that the good things in life never lasted, that people always left, that kindness could vanish as quickly as it appeared. He didn't know yet that Lirio's father, the man who had taught her kindness was strength, would soon step into his life as well. He didn't know that his mother, Selvara, would find something she thought she had lost forever. For now, he only knew this, that he wasn't invisible anymore. And for a boy like Orion Kaelf, being seen was the beginning of everything. Selvara Kaelf was only 27, but there were days when she felt twice her age. Her silvery blonde hair, once worn loose and carefree, was now often tied back quickly before rushing out the door. Her deep blue eyes still held beauty, but behind them lingered the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights, too many worries carried alone. She had not imagined life this way. She had once dreamed of a family filled with laughter, of a partner who would share the load, of a home built on trust. But dreams can break. And when her marriage ended, it wasn't just her heart that was left in pieces. It was her son's world, too. Divorce had forced her into survival mode. Days blurred together, an endless rhythm of work, bills, and responsibilities. She juggled a demanding job with school drop-offs, late-night meals, and moments of guilt when she couldn't be everywhere at once. And though she hid it well, though she smiled for Orion's sake, inside she carried a constant ache, an ache of wondering whether she was enough. She saw it in her son, too, the way he withdrew, the way he carried silence like a shield. It broke her heart because she knew it wasn't just shyness. It was the weight of everything he couldn't say out loud. She wanted to fix it, to take away his loneliness, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't be both mother and father, and that truth haunted her. Still, Selvar was determined. She worked late hours, came home weary, and yet always checked on Orion before bed, brushing his hair back gently, whispering promises that tomorrow would be better. She carried her battles quietly, with grace and determination, because she believed her son deserved nothing less. But beneath that strength was a woman longing for something she no longer believed she deserved. Comfort, companionship, someone to share the weight she carried. And then came the moment she noticed her son at school, sitting across from a bright little girl with golden hair, sharing a sandwich, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in so long. For the first time, Orion wasn't alone. For the first time, he was being reached by someone she herself couldn't reach. The sight touched her deeply. Gratitude filled her, mixed with fragile hope. Who was this girl? And who was the man who had raised her to be so kind? Selvar didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question would change everything. Because through her son's new friendship, her path was about to cross with someone who understood her struggles in a way few ever could. A father who carried the same scars of sacrifice, the same fears, the same relentless devotion. Her battle had been long and lonely, but soon she would discover she didn't have to fight it alone. Sometimes, the most important connections don't come with warning. They arrive quietly, almost by accident, in the places we least expect. For Chiron and Silvara, it began on an ordinary afternoon. Lyriel had been sitting with Orion at school for several weeks now, her kindness drawing him further out his shell. Teachers noticed a change, his shoulders less hunched, his voice a little steadier, the shadow in his eyes not quite as heavy. But it was Silvara who felt it most. Every day when Orion came home, she saw a new light flicker in him. He spoke more. He laughed sometimes. And when she asked what had changed, he always mentioned the same name, Lyriel. Gratitude bloomed in her heart. She wanted to thank this little girl and the father who had clearly raised her well. That chance came one evening after school. Chiron had arrived to pick up Lyriel. Selvar was there too, waiting for Orion. Their eyes met for the first time, steel gray meeting ocean blue. For a moment, neither spoke. Two young parents, each carrying their own quiet weariness, their own private storms, standing face to face. It was Orion who broke the silence, tugging at his mother's sleeve and whispering, "This is Lyriel's dad." Selvara offered a small, grateful smile. "Your daughter, she's been so kind to Orion. Thank you." Chiron glanced down at Lyriel, pride flickering in his eyes, then back at Selvara. His voice was steady but gentle. "She's just being herself. I only taught her that kindness is strength. Looks like she's proving me right." The words lingered between them, simple, yet heavy with meaning. Selvar felt something stir, not just gratitude, but recognition. Here was a man who understood, a man who had walked his own lonely road, who knew the weight of raising a child alone. Their first conversation was polite. A few words about school, about the children, about how quickly they seemed to be growing. But neither of them rushed to leave. And slowly, those words stretched into something more. Shared laughter, small admissions, moments of unexpected ease. For Chiron, it was unusual. He wasn't quick to open up, not after years of shouldering everything alone. But Selvara's presence felt steady, familiar, somehow, as if she had been carrying battles that mirrored his own. For Silvara, it was unexpected. She hadn't let herself think about companionship, about connection. Her world had been narrowed to survival. Yet here stood a man who didn't just listen. He understood. He didn't pity her. He didn't judge her. He saw her. It was only the beginning, but something had shifted. The kindness of one child had drawn two parents together. What started as gratitude was becoming recognition. And what began as recognition was slowly, almost imperceptibly, turning into a bond. Neither of them knew how far it would go. But as Chiron watched Lyriel and Orion walk ahead together, laughing in the golden light of the setting sun, he realized something. Their worlds had already begun to collide. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what they all needed. What begins with small moments often grows into something far greater. For Lyriel and Orion, it started with shared lunches and quiet conversations. But soon, their friendship spilled beyond the walls of school. After class, they would run together across the playground, their laughter weaving through the air. At home, Lyriel would ask her father if Orion could come over, her bright eyes pleading with the kind of certainty only a child carries. And Chiron, though cautious at first, could see the difference this new friendship made in both children. He always said yes. Before long, Orion was sitting at their kitchen table, shy at first, but slowly relaxing as Lyriel chattered about her day. Chiron would watch them with quiet pride, setting plates before them, amused at how quickly his daughter had taken to calling Orion her almost brother. And when Silvara arrived to pick him up, she would sometimes linger at the doorway, smiling at the sight of her son with color in his cheeks, laughter in his voice. It wasn't long before Chiron began inviting her in, offering coffee, then dinner. What began as politeness became routine, and what began as routine grew into something neither of them could ignore. The evenings they spent together were not glamorous. There were no candlelit dinners, no grand declarations. Instead, there was warmth in the ordinary. Shared meals where the children laughed too loudly. Conversations at the sink while washing dishes side by side. Walks in the park where Lyriel and Orion darted ahead, leaving Chiron and Silvara to fall into step beside each other. It was in these small, unguarded moments that their bond deepened. Chiron found himself listening to Silvara talk about her struggles, her sleepless nights, her fears of failing her son. And as she spoke, he realized how familiar her words felt, because they echoed his own battles, the ones he carried silently for years. She wasn't just another parent. She was someone who understood. Silvara, too, felt something shift. With Chiron, she didn't have to pretend to be stronger than she was. She didn't have to hide the cracks. He saw them, and instead of pity, he offered respect. Instead of judgment, he offered companionship. The children, in their innocence, only saw joy. To them, these gatherings were about games, laughter, and the comfort of being together. They didn't see the way Karen's eyes softened when Silvara laughed. They didn't notice how Silvara's hands sometimes lingered on Karen's arm a moment longer than necessary. They didn't understand the quiet smiles that passed between the two adults. But those smiles carried a weight neither could deny. Little by little, two separate lives were intertwining. Not forced, not rushed, just gently, naturally, like rivers flowing toward the same sea. And though neither Chiron nor Silvara said it out loud, both felt it. The warmth of something they hadn't expected. Something fragile yet undeniable. Something that felt like the beginning of healing. The children's bond had created the bridge. And now, step by step, Chiron and Silvara were walking across it, together. Spring arrived in the town with a kind of magic that only comes once a year. Lanterns were strung across the streets, glowing softly as dusk fell. Music drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of fresh flowers and sweet pastries from the festival stalls. It was a kind of evening where laughter seemed to echo longer, where even the quietest souls felt a pull to join the celebration. For Lyriel and Orion, it was pure wonder. Hand in hand, they darted between booths, their eyes wide at the bright colors, the ribbons, the sparkling lights. Their laughter rang out like bells, unburdened and free, weaving through the festival as though it belonged to the night itself. Chiron and Silvara followed close behind, watching their children run beneath the lanterns. For both of them, it was more than just a festival. It was a glimpse of something they hadn't felt in years. Peace. Chiron carried himself with his usual quiet strength. But tonight, there was something softer in his eyes as he watched Lyriel and Orion race ahead. He saw not just two children playing, but the beginnings of a family forming before his eyes. Silvara, walking beside him, felt her heart swell as she listened to her son's laughter. It had been so long since she had seen him this carefree. And beside her was a man who, without even realizing it, had given her son this gift. As they strolled through the lantern-lit streets, their conversation slipped easily between them. Small jokes, memories of childhood festivals, quiet confessions about the challenges of raising children alone. There was no awkwardness now, no guarded distance. Only a gentle closeness, growing with every step. And then it happened. They stopped near the center of the festival, where a canopy of lanterns hung low, glowing golden against the night. Lyriel and Orion spun in circles beneath them, laughing breathlessly. The music swelled, the air alive with warmth. And in that moment, Karen's hand brushed against Silvara's. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Chiron reached for her hand. His grip was steady, not demanding, but asking. And Silvara, she didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined beneath the lantern light. A simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of everything they'd endured. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the silent battles fought in the dark. In that touch was a promise that they didn't have to carry it all alone anymore. They stood there together. Two young parents who had spent years believing they had to be strong on their own, now realizing strength could also be found in sharing the burden. As the children laughed and the lanterns glowed, the festival became more than just a celebration of spring. It became the moment two hearts, worn yet resilient, finally found each other. And what had started with a little girl's kindness at a lunch table had blossomed into something neither Chiron nor Silvara had expected. The beginning of a love story and the fragile, beautiful possibility of one united family. Every story has a turning point, a moment when the past loosens its grip and something new begins to take root. For Chiron, Silvara, Lyriel, and Orion, that moment came not with grand speeches or sudden declarations, but with a quiet certainty of belonging. What had started with a simple act of kindness, a sandwich shared across a lunch table, had grown into something far greater. A boy who once sat in silence had found his laughter again. A girl who believed kindness was strength had proven just how powerful it could be. A father who had carried his burdens alone discovered he didn't have to anymore. And a mother who had almost forgotten what hope felt like had found it blooming quietly in her heart once more. The days that followed the spring festival felt different. They were still filled with the ordinary chaos of life. Work, school, late-night homework, bills that never seemed to end. But there was also something new woven into their routines. Togetherness. Family dinners no longer ended when Orion's mother arrived. Now she stayed. Conversations stretched long after the plates were cleared. Laughter filled the spaces where loneliness used to echo. On weekends, the four of them walked to the park, Lyriel and Orion running ahead, while Chiron and Silvara fell into step beside each other, no longer strangers, but something much closer. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still worries, still the ghosts of the lives they had lived before. But this time, they weren't facing them alone. For Chiron, it was a realization that his daughter's kindness had built a bridge he never could have built himself. For Silvara, it was the comfort of finding someone who understood her battles without explanation. For the children, it was the joy of knowing that the love they had been given was not fragile, not fleeting, but strong enough to hold them all. And so, a new chapter began. Not defined by what they had lost, but by what they had found in each other. Because sometimes, family isn't just the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one that kindness brings together. And in this small town, beneath the lanterns of a spring night, a father, a mother, a daughter, and a son discovered that love, once planted in the soil of compassion, could grow into something unshakable. What began with loneliness ended with connection. What began with struggle ended with hope. What began with a sandwich shared at school became the story of a new beginning. Kindness. It's easy to overlook it, to treat it as something small, fragile, insignificant. But as we've seen in this story, kindness is anything but small. It has the power to change lives, to heal wounds we cannot see, and to bring people together in ways we never expect. One little girl chose to sit beside a quiet boy. She chose to share her lunch. And from that single choice, an entire chain of moments unfolded. Laughter returned to a child who thought he had lost it. Two parents, each fighting their own battles alone, discovered strength in each other. And 4 lives became bound together, not by chance, but by compassion. It makes you wonder, how many lives could be changed by one simple act of kindness in your own world? How many invisible battles could be lightened? How many hearts lifted? If you chose to notice, to reach out to care. This story isn't just about Chiron, Liriel, Selvara, and Orion. It's about all of us. Because in a world that can feel heavy, unkind, and divided, kindness remains a quiet force that holds us together. If this story touched you, let it be a reminder. What you choose to give, even in the smallest moments, might mean the world to someone else. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of love, resilience, and extraordinary power hidden in ordinary lives, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who could use a little hope today. And in the comments below, tell us, what's the kindest act you've ever witnessed? Because sometimes sharing your story is the spark that inspires someone else to do the same. Thank you for watching. And remember, kindness is strength.